125 fighter jets, 14 bunker-buster bombs weighing 30,000 pounds each, 3 underground nuclear facilities. On June 22, 2025, at 3 a.m. local time, the United States executed the most audacious military operation in modern Middle Eastern history. Operation Midnight Hammer had begun. In 47 minutes, everything would change. But what makes this attack truly extraordinary isn't just its devastating power. It's that this confrontation between America and modern Persia was prophesied over 2,600 years ago, chapter by chapter, detail by detail, in the pages of an ancient book that billions of people own but few truly understand. The Fordow facility, built 330 feet beneath a mountain near the city of Qom, protected by tons of reinforced concrete and natural rock. Iranian engineers believed it was indestructible. They were wrong. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the only aircraft in the world capable of carrying the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, penetrated Iranian airspace undetected. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, would confirm on September 26, 2025, that almost all sensitive equipment at the site had been destroyed. But to understand why this attack was inevitable, we need to go back 2,600 years to a time when a prophet named Ezekiel saw the future with disturbing precision. The year 593 BC. The prophet Ezekiel, exiled in Babylon, receives an apocalyptic vision. In chapters 38 and 39 of his book, he describes a massive coalition of nations that will attack Israel in the last days. And there, mentioned explicitly, is Persia. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets, he writes in Ezekiel 38:5. Persia, the biblical name for modern Iran, a name this country bore until 1935. But Ezekiel wasn't the only prophet to see Persia in end-time events. Jeremiah, writing in chapter 49, verses 34 through 39, prophecies specifically about Elam, a region that today corresponds to southwestern Iran, exactly where the nuclear facilities of Natanz and Isfahan are located. Here's what Jeremiah wrote 26 centuries ago: "I will break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might." A bow. In prophetic language, this represents a nation's military power. And in 2025, what constitutes Iran's main military strength? Its ballistic missiles, its uranium enrichment centrifuges, its nuclear program, exactly what was targeted on June 22nd. But Jeremiah's prophecy doesn't stop there. It ends with an astonishing promise. "Yet I will restore the fortunes of Elam in days to come, declares the Lord." Destruction first, then restoration. Judgment followed by redemption. A pattern we see repeated throughout biblical history. Let's go back to June 22, 2025. President Donald Trump is in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and other top officials. Satellite images released later show the intensity of the moment. At 8:04 a.m. Washington time, Trump writes on Truth Social, "We have finished our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. All aircraft are now out of Iranian airspace." The operation used 14 GBU-57 bombs, never before used in combat. Each bomb weighs 30,000 pounds and can penetrate 200 feet of reinforced concrete. At Fordow alone, 12 of these monsters were dropped. The Natanz site, one of Iran's 2 main uranium enrichment facilities, underground halls 130 feet deep, reinforced by 26 feet of concrete and steel. Satellite images from Maxar Technologies taken on June 22nd show a new crater 18 feet in diameter directly above a portion of the underground facility. But what happened deep below remains largely invisible to satellites. This is precisely what military planners had anticipated. The centrifuges that spin at incredible speeds to enrich uranium are extremely sensitive to vibrations. A single shock can destroy them completely, and 14 bombs weighing 30,000 pounds create more than just a shock. They create a localized earthquake. Andrea Stricker of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies explains, due to the massive damage and shockwave that would have been sent through by 12 massive ordnance penetrators at the Fordow site, it is likely that its centrifuges were damaged or rendered inoperable. David Albright, president of the Institute for Science and International Security, goes further. Overall, the Israeli and US strikes effectively destroyed Iran's centrifuge enrichment program. The Pentagon announced that the strikes had set back Iran's nuclear program by at least 1 to 2 years. Some experts speak of several years, but are these numbers really accurate? Here, opinions diverge dramatically. CNN reported on June 25th that a preliminary assessment by the Defense Intelligence Agency suggests that the strikes did not destroy the essential components of Iran's nuclear program and only set it back by a few months. According to 7 sources briefed on this assessment, the impact on all 3 sites was largely limited to above-ground structures, which were severely damaged. This includes the electrical infrastructure of the sites and some surface facilities used to process uranium into metal for bomb making. But the controversy doesn't stop there. On September 26, 2025, Rafael Grossi confirms to Reuters that almost all sensitive equipment at the Fordow site was destroyed. However, he adds that if Iran chose to further enrich its existing stockpile of uranium to 90%, it would only take a few weeks to complete the process. The truth seems to lie somewhere between these extremes. Trump and his administration insist on total obliteration. Iran publicly minimizes the damage while privately admitting significant losses. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi states that the nuclear facilities sustained substantial and serious damage. But Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei claims that Trump exaggerated the impact of the strikes. Who's telling the truth? Probably no one completely. But one thing is certain, the attack was devastating, even if it wasn't totally annihilating. Before we continue, we need to understand something crucial about the biblical context. Today's Iran isn't just another Middle Eastern nation. It's the direct heir to the Persian Empire, one of the 4 great world powers prophesied in the book of Daniel. Daniel, chapter 2, describes a statue representing successive empires that would dominate the world. Babylon, gold; Medo-Persia, silver; Greece, bronze; and Rome, iron. Persia was the second world power. And in Daniel chapter 8, we see an even more specific vision, a 2-horned ram representing the kings of Media and Persia. This ram charges toward the west, north, and south. No one can stand against it. But then comes a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes, representing Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. The goat completely destroys the ram. This is exactly what happened in history. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire between 334 and 330 BC. But here's what's fascinating. The prophecy doesn't stop there. Daniel 8:8 says that the great horn of the goat will be broken and 4 prominent horns will rise in its place. And this is precisely what happened. After Alexander's death, his empire divided among his 4 generals. Every prophesied detail was fulfilled with surgical precision. So when the Bible prophesies about Persia in the last days, should we ignore these words? On June 13, 2025, 10 days before the American attack, Israel launches Operation Rising Lion. Approximately 200 Israeli fighter jets, explosive-laden drones, and Mossad sabotage teams strike dozens of Iranian nuclear and military installations, including the Natanz enrichment site. Several key facilities are destroyed. Reports suggest that Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders and nuclear scientists were killed. Iran responds with approximately 100 drones targeting Israeli territory. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office reports dozens of deaths and hundreds wounded. But what's truly remarkable is the operation's name, Rising Lion. On June 12th, before the first strike, Netanyahu visits the Western Wall in Jerusalem and slips a handwritten note between the ancient stones. The message, released by his office a week later, said, "The people will arise as a lion." This reference to the lion isn't accidental. Revelation 5:5 calls Jesus the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But even more significant, the lion has been Israel's national symbol for millennia. And in biblical prophecies, the lion often represents the Jewish people and their national resurrection. Numbers 23:24 says, "The people rise like a lioness, they rouse themselves like a lion." This prophecy, spoken by Balaam over 3,400 years ago, described a people who refused to remain defeated, a people who would always rise again. And in 2025, after centuries of exile and persecution, after the Holocaust and endless wars, Israel indeed rises like a lion. Evangelical pastor Greg Laurie writes in a blog post early in the war, "This is a biblical foreshadowing." He cites headlines like "Iranian gas field hit by Israeli drone strike" and "Israel eliminates top Iranian Air Force commanders" as evidence of deeper meaning. The Bible clearly predicted that Israel would be scattered and gathered, which was fulfilled on May 14, 1948. And you could say that's when the prophetic time clock started ticking. This wasn't just a sign, it was a super sign, Laurie explains. Scripture predicts that in the last days, a great northern coalition, including Persia, modern Iran, will rise against Israel. See Ezekiel 38:39. While what we're seeing today is not the complete fulfillment of this prophecy, it's certainly a foreshadowing. But why does Iran hate Israel so much? To understand this, we need to go back to 1979. For centuries, the Persian and Jewish peoples maintained peaceful relations and mutual cultural respect. The Bible itself confirms this. King Cyrus of Persia, mentioned by name in Isaiah 44:28 and 45:1, 200 years before his birth, was the one who allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Ezra 1:2-3 records Cyrus's words. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says: "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up, and may the Lord their God be with them." The relationship between Persia and the Jews was so positive that the entire book of Esther takes place in the Persian Empire. Esther, a young Jewish woman, becomes queen of Persia and saves her people from a planned genocide. King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes Vet, rules over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. And it's in his court that this drama of miraculous deliverance unfolds. Esther 8:17 tells us, "In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating, and many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them, Persians becoming Jewish." A remarkable cultural and religious integration, but everything changed in 1979. The Islamic Revolution overthrew the Iranian monarchy, and Iran became the world's leading state. Sponsor of terrorism, directed first against Israel. The chants of "death to Israel" and "death to America" have echoed from mosques for 46 years. The Ayatollah regime has funded Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and other terrorist groups dedicated to Israel's destruction. Why? Because radical Islam sees Israel's very existence as an offense to Allah. A Muslim land, even though it never was in biblical history, controlled by Jews, is considered intolerable. And Iran, as the principal defender of Shiite Islam, has self-appointed itself as the leader of this holy war against the Jewish state. Let's return to Ezekiel 38. This prophecy describes a massive invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates, and bars. Ezekiel 38 to 10 to 11. The coalition includes Gog, from the land of Magog, widely identified as modern Russia, Meshech and Tubal, Turkey, Persia, Iran, Cush, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Put, Libya. Look at a map. All these nations surround Israel today, and all, with the possible exception of Russia, are now majority Muslim and hostile to Israel. But here's what's fascinating. Ezekiel says this invasion will occur when Israel is living in safety in unwalled villages. Before October 7th, 2023, Israel might have described its security level this way. The economy was flourishing. Relations with some Arab countries were normalizing through the Abraham Accords. But that day's devastation reminded everyone of Israel's vulnerability despite its strength. It turns out Israel wasn't living safely, all of them without walls. Not yet. So when will this prophecy be fulfilled exactly? Probably during the tribulation period, after the rapture of the church, when a temporary peace treaty gives Israel a false sense of security. But here we need to be clear about something. The American attack on June 22nd, 2025 is not the fulfillment of the Ezekiel 38 prophecy. Greg Laurie makes this clear. Now, am I suggesting that what just happened is going directly to lead to the Ezekiel 38 scenario? I don't think that's necessarily the case, but it's certainly reason for us to sit up and pay attention. It's a foreshadowing, a foretaste, an alignment of pieces on the prophetic chessboard. But it's not yet the final fulfillment. Why? Because in Ezekiel 38, it's God himself who destroys the invading coalition through supernatural means. Earthquakes, confusion in enemy ranks, hail, fire, and brimstone from heaven. 84% of the coalition army dies on the battlefield. It takes 7 months to bury the dead and 7 years to clean up the mess. Nothing like that happened on June 22nd, 2025. What occurred was a conventional military strike, however powerful. But here's what's remarkable. This strike weakened Iran precisely at the time when prophecies say it should be strong for the final invasion. So what does this mean? Perhaps we're witnessing the setup. Perhaps Iran will need to rebuild before it can participate in the Ezekiel 38 coalition. Or perhaps this attack is part of a series of events that will ultimately lead to that prophesied confrontation. We don't know for certain, but we know we need to pay attention. On June 23rd, 2025, one day after the American attack, Rafael Grossi, head of the IAEA, convenes an emergency meeting and warns that the attack risks collapsing the global nuclear non-proliferation regime and unimaginable destruction if countries don't negotiate peace. He asks Iran to allow IAEA inspectors to assess the damage, radiation levels, and release of toxins. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran insists no contamination recorded. There is no danger to residents around these sites. Safety is in a stable state. But the truth is that no one outside Iran has been able to independently verify the extent of the damage. The facilities were hit, that's certain. But to what degree? We may never know completely. What we do know is that Iran has threatened to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi declares, "The United States, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, committed a serious violation of the UN Charter, international law, and the NPT by attacking Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities. This morning's events are outrageous and will have lasting consequences. Every UN member should be alarmed by this extremely dangerous, illegal, and criminal behavior." Iran's parliament passed a law suspending cooperation with the IAEA, citing the agency's failure to condemn the American and Israeli attacks on the country's nuclear facilities. And now, Iran's nuclear program is in the shadows, away from international inspectors' scrutiny. The Geneva Conventions prohibit attacks on installations containing dangerous forces, namely dams, dikes, and nuclear electrical generating stations. But the United States and Israel argued that Iran's facilities weren't peaceful power plants, but disguised weapons facilities. President Trump declared, Iran's major nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally annihilated. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth added that Iran's nuclear ambitions had been obliterated by the strikes. But even if this is true, does it really solve the problem? American officials believe that Iran also maintains secret nuclear facilities that weren't targeted in the strike and remain operational. Satellite imagery showed trucks leaving Fordow before the American strikes. Rafael Grossi also stated that Iran could enrich uranium again in a few months. Enrichment is the process of improving the purity of radioactive uranium atoms to produce nuclear fuel, and with enough enrichment, this fuel becomes a weapon. Iran had accumulated over 900 pounds of uranium enriched to 60% purity, just below weapons grade, before the attack. That's enough for several nuclear weapons if enriched further. So did the attack really solve the problem? Or did it simply delay the inevitable? Here, we must return to Jeremiah's prophecy. Jeremiah 49:36-37 says, I will bring against Elam the four winds from the four quarters of heaven. I will scatter them to the four winds, and there will not be a nation where Elam's exiles do not go. I will shatter Elam before their foes, before those who want to kill them. I will bring disaster on them, even my fierce anger, declares the Lord. I will pursue them with the sword until I have made an end of them. God promises to break Elam's power. But the prophecy doesn't end with judgment. Verse 39, Yet I will restore the fortunes of Elam in days to come, declares the Lord. There is hope for the Iranian people, and this hope is already being realized. Right now, under the noses of the mullahs, the Iranian people are rising up. Thousands of young Iranians are rejecting radical Islam and turning to the God of Israel. Reports of massive conversions to Christianity in Iran are flooding in from around the world. Experts estimate there could be between 500,000 and 1 million Christians in Iran today, compared to virtually zero in 1979. It's a silent revolution, a spiritual revolution, and it's fulfilling God's promise to restore Elam in the last days. The Islamic regime hates Israel. The regime funds terrorism. The regime builds nuclear weapons. But inside Iran, there are people crying out to the true God, and prophecy says that one day he will restore them. On June 24, 2025, 2 days after the American attack, Iran and Israel agreed to a ceasefire announced by Trump. Both countries described the war's outcome as a historic victory. Israel claims that Iran's nuclear program has been destroyed or severely damaged. Iran claims to have defended its sovereignty and survived unprecedented aggression. Who really won? Probably neither one completely. But what's clear is that the Middle East has changed forever. Iran has been humiliated. Its most secret facilities have been penetrated. Its nuclear program, whatever it says publicly, has suffered a major setback, but it hasn't been eliminated, and a wounded enemy is often more dangerous than an intact one. Steve Myers, host of Beyond Today, points to the prophecy in Revelation 16 that describes a worldwide confrontation that includes Israel and Iran in the last days. Scripture teaches that there will be an alliance of nations that will come against Israel in the last days. Iran is connected to the king of the south, an alliance of nations that will confront Israel and oppose a northern alliance in the last days. The prophecy of Revelation 16 points to this coming worldwide confrontation at Armageddon, and it highlights the involvement of nations that include Iran and its allies. Pastor John Hagee, founder and chairman of Christians United for Israel, explained that Israel had no other option than to attack Iran. What Israel is doing, just as when Israel destroyed the Iraqi and Syrian nuclear reactors, was protecting not only the Jewish state but the entire free world. But here's the question we all need to ask ourselves. Are we really in the last days? Or is this just another Middle Eastern war in a long series of wars? Let's look at the signs Jesus himself gave. In Matthew 24:6-8, Jesus says, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains." Wars, rumors of wars, nations against nations. This could describe any era of human history, but Jesus also gave specific signs that would distinguish this final generation. Luke 21:24 says, "They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." Jerusalem would be under non-Jewish control until a certain time, and then it would return to the Jews. This is exactly what happened. After almost 2,000 years of exile and foreign control, Jerusalem returned to Jewish sovereignty in 1967 during the Six-Day War. Pastor Greg Laurie calls it a super sign. This wasn't just a sign, it was a super sign. That's when the prophetic time clock started ticking. On May 14, 1948, Israel became a nation again. Isaiah 66:8 had prophesied, "Who has ever heard of such things? Who has ever seen things like this? Can a country be born in a day or a nation be brought forth in a moment?"